Student whispered snide comments during every discussion, so I turned him into the star of the show. I teach high school history, one of those electives juniors and seniors take when they're looking for an easy A in a room with air conditioning. Most of the time, I enjoy it. I get to talk about wars, revolutions, and dead people with an occasional pop quiz to keep the blood pressure up. But every now and then, you get that one student. Let me introduce you to Connor. Connor was a senior with a gift for sarcasm and an allergy to effort. He never outright disrespected me, he was too sly for that, but he had this habit of whispering smart-ass comments under his breath during class discussions. And he did it just loud enough for the people around him to hear and laugh, but quiet enough that if I called him out, he could hit me with that innocent what? I didn't say anything. Look. Here's a taste of some of his greatest hits. When we were discussing the American Revolution. I'm sure fighting over taxes was super noble. It's not like anyone just wanted to stop paying for tea. During a lesson on trench warfare in WWI. Ah yes, history, the world's longest PowerPoint presentation. When another student answered a question about Napoleon. Is that the French guy with the complex or your ex? Now, I'm all for a good joke. But Connor wasn't being funny. He was being disruptive. He didn't care about learning, he just wanted to entertain his little corner of the room. And I had warned him, twice, to stop with the under-the-breath commentary. So, I decided to try a different strategy. I turned him into the main character. Every time we had a class discussion from that day on, I made Connor my go-to guy. Discussing the Enlightenment? Connor, what are your thoughts on Voltaire's views on religious tolerance? A segment on the civil rights movement? Connor, can you explain the significance of the March on Washington? A brief lecture on the fall of the Berlin Wall? Connor, would you say this event symbolized the collapse of Soviet influence, or do you think that's an oversimplification? He tried to dodge. At first, he'd shrug and say I dunno or give half-hearted answers. But I didn't let him off the hook. I'd nod seriously, then go. Interesting. Can you elaborate on that? Every time. He once answered, I guess the Cold War ended because people got tired of being cold? I deadpanned, fascinating analysis. Let's unpack that. Why do you think fatigue played a role in foreign policy? The class laughed, but now he was the joke. And he knew it. Eventually, he started doing something I'd never seen him do before, pay attention. Because if he didn't, he'd get called on, and I'd force him to try to analyze whatever it was we were discussing. I didn't care how ridiculous his answer was, I'd spin it back around like he was a tenured professor making a radical new argument. One time, he tried to pull the same trick during a group discussion on McCarthyism. I caught him muttering, "This is like Among Us for politicians." So I clapped my hands and said, "Connor, you just made a brilliant comparison. McCarthyism was a kind of national witch hunt, not unlike social deduction games. Tell us more about the role of suspicions in the political process." He turned red. He muttered something about people being Susie, and I praised it like it was groundbreaking. By mid-semester, he stopped whispering entirely. By finals, he actually raised his hand voluntarily to answer a question about the Vietnam War. It wasn't even a joke. I could have cried. I'm not saying I transformed him into a model student. He still barely passed. But the snide comments died, and the rest of the class got to focus without hearing background commentary like they were watching a roast battle. Sometimes, the best revenge is giving someone exactly what they want, but on your terms. TLDR. Student kept making sarcastic comments during my history lectures. So I called on him every day, forced him to explain his remarks, and turned him into the star of class discussions until he stopped being a disruptive little gremlin. Too smart to study? Not smart enough for my pop quiz. I teach 10th grade world history at a pretty average high school. Most of my students are solid kids, some are curious, some are bored, some are just trying to survive, but they're all pretty manageable. Except for Aiden. Now, Aiden was smart. Like, really smart. He could absorb information like a sponge, crack jokes that referenced obscure philosophers, and even correct the occasional typo in my slides. Annoying, but fair game. But instead of being helpful or humble about his intelligence, he turned it into a personality. Every single day, he'd waltz into class saying stuff like, "What are we doing today? Another worksheet for the drones?" Or worse, when I passed back graded quizzes, he'd announce loudly, "Didn't study again. Still got a 98. And he wasn't lying. The kid was sharp enough to coast. He'd ace every test just by showing up, half listening, and stringing together insights with raw talent. But the real problem was how he bragged about it, making classmates feel stupid for putting in effort. One time, Maya, a straight-A student who worked her butt off, asked him how he did so well on the essay. He shrugged and said, "I just have a brain that works better under pressure." "You probably just need more practice." That was the last straw for me. I decided to teach Aiden a lesson. Not to crush him, but to make him realize that effort matters and that being smart isn't an excuse to be smug. So here's what I did. We were starting a new unit on ancient Mesopotamia, including Hammurabi's Code. The textbook reading assigned for homework was straightforward. Not too long, not too dry. And right there, in the middle of the section, not hidden in a sidebar or footnote, was a super interesting historical tidbit. It talked about how under Hammurabi's Code, if a builder constructed a house that collapsed and eliminated the owner, the builder could be sentenced to death. Brutal stuff. It even mentioned how this was one of the earliest examples of accountability laws in recorded history. I didn't bring it up in the lecture. It wasn't in the study guide. I didn't mention it during class discussion. But it was clearly in the reading. Memorable, even. Then, the next day, I walked in, held up a stack of half-sheets, and said, "Pop quiz. 1 question. Worth 100%. Put everything away." Cue collective groan. "Aiden?" He smirked, leaned back in his chair, and said, "Let me guess, some basic vocab word I can guess from context?" The question? According to Hammurabi's Code, what was the consequence if a builder's poorly constructed house collapsed and eliminated the homeowner? You could hear the air suck out of the room. I saw Maya smile like it was Christmas. The kids who did the reading scribbled confidently. Aiden, on the other hand, stared at the paper like it had personally betrayed him. He glanced up at me. Then down. Then back up. He wrote something. I later read it, probably a fine or jail time? And turned it in last, noticeably quieter than usual. Next day, I passed back the results. Only 6 students got a perfect score. And I said, very casually, "Looks like the people who actually did the reading had no problem with this one." Aiden got a 0. His first one ever. He didn't say anything, but you could tell it bugged him. He didn't joke. He didn't smirk. And miracle of miracles, he raised his hand the next day to ask for a copy of the next reading assignment. Now, here's the thing. I don't hate Aiden. I actually admire the kid. He's bright, curious, and has leadership potential. But I saw that his ego was starting to hurt other people, and eventually, it was going to hurt him too. So after school that week, I caught him before he left and said this. "Hey. I know you're smart. That's obvious. But don't confuse natural intelligence with mastery. And definitely don't look down on people who need to study or ask questions. There's no prize for being a lone genius if everyone secretly hopes you fail. You're not just here to prove you're clever, you're here to grow. Trust me, effort always wins in the long run." He nodded. Didn't say much. But the next few weeks? He did the readings. Asked real questions. Stopped belittling people. And yeah, he's still smart. But now he's not in but about it. TLDR. Smart but arrogant student kept bragging about never needing to study and mocked classmates who did. So I gave a surprise 1-question pop quiz about a very specific fact from the reading, but not mentioned in lectures. He got it wrong, failed for the first time, and finally learned that effort matters even for smart kids. He mocked me all year, then asked for a recommendation letter. I forgot to submit it. Some of us teachers are saints. Some of us are tired. And some of us, well, we remember everything. Let me tell you about Tyler. Tyler was a senior in my AP literature class a few years ago. He wasn't the worst student academically, he turned in decent essays, usually on time, and could put together a coherent argument, but he had the kind of personality that makes you root for inanimate objects to fall on him. He was the type of kid who thought sarcasm was a personality. Every time I said something earnest about literature, he had to chime in with a comment for laughs. But they weren't just jokes. They were personal. Example. We were discussing the role of tragic flaws in Shakespearean characters, and I said, a tragic flaw is often a blind spot that leads to a character's downfall. Tyler, like how Mr. H thinks he's inspiring us with poetry when really we're just counting ceiling tiles. Cue laughter. Another time, when I mentioned I'd been a teacher for over a decade. Tyler, not even quietly, yikes. Imagine doing this for that long. Must have missed your shot at being a failed novelist. The worst part? He'd say this stuff just loud enough to be heard but not loud enough to be officially documented as disrespect. And his little posse of wannabe comedians would always laugh, egging him on. Outside of class, he'd do things like call me Professor Discount on his Finsta, which, yes, I saw students are not stealthy. Tell the class that Mr. H has divorced energy, I'm not even married. And once, during parent-teacher conferences, he told his mom in front of me, he's alright. Kinda boring, but he means well. Through it all, I smiled. Nodded. Gave him the grades he earned. But I never forgot. I don't get angry, I take notes. Fast forward to spring. College applications are due. Everyone's scrambling for recommendation letters. And who do I get an email from? You guessed it. Tyler. Hey Mr. H, I know we didn't always see eye to eye, but I was wondering if you could write me a letter of recommendation for Columbia. I really enjoyed your class and think you could speak to my growth. Oh, did you now? Part of me wanted to just say no, but I'm a professional. So I replied, cheerfully. Of course. I'd be happy to write one. Just send me the deadline and any details you'd like me to include. He sent me a whole list of talking points. His leadership in class discussions. His unique voice and perspective. His passion for literature. I laughed so hard I almost printed it out and framed it. But I played the game. I wrote the letter. And let me tell you, it was beautiful. Glowing. If Columbia had seen it, they might have thrown him a scholarship on the spot. I even printed it on school letterhead and signed it with a flourish. But I didn't send it. The deadline came and went. Nothing was submitted. A week later, Tyler emailed me. Hey, just checking, did you send in the recommendation? Columbia said it's still missing. I waited a few hours. Then I replied. Oh no, I'm so sorry. I must have completely forgotten to upload it. I assumed you'd ask someone more qualified to speak on your skills. My mistake. Best of luck. Radio silence. A few days later, he came to class looking like he hadn't slept. His spot at Columbia was deferred pending documents. He had to scramble to get another teacher to write a last-minute letter which, from what I heard, wasn't nearly as strong. Did I feel bad? Let's review. He mocked me in class, insulted me to my face and behind my back, made my lectures harder to teach, and then expected me to help launch his Ivy League dreams? Nah. I didn't feel bad. I felt like justice had been served with a side of poetic irony. TLDR. Rude, sarcastic students spent all year mocking me in class and online. Then asked for a glowing recommendation letter. I wrote it but forgot to submit it on time. When he asked, I told him I assumed he'd pick someone more qualified. He missed his college deadline and had to scramble. I regret nothing.